In this project address book, we have created an extra method in the file utilities class. So I suggest that you go and look at the code where we have our first method was read file, and between the first method and what was the second method, write file, between those two, we've added a new method called exists. So if you go and look at the source code for this project, you will find this. I am going to explain what I've done here. Firstly, I wanted to have a method that could allow me to determine if I'm trying to open a file under normal circumstances. If the file exists, I wanted to return me a true. And if the file doesn't exist, I wanted to return me a false. So I say normal circumstances. That means that I don't have permission problems. I'm running this in Windows, not in Linux. Or I'm running it in Linux using the root user who's got access to all folders and files. So how this method works, it's going to try to read a file. You see, I'm doing file input stream. I'm passing it a file name, and I'm going to try to read a file. In the happy case that I could read a file, I'm going to close. But I'm going to set a variable exists equals true. And I will return exists. The happy case, it'll go through with no exceptions, and it comes back with a true. However, if the file doesn't exist, when I try to read the file here, I'm going to get an exception. You'll notice that I've used the two catch blocks here. So I'm lazy. I haven't reinvented the wheel. I've actually taken this from the file read code. If you look at the file read code here and you look at this, you'll swear that the code looks identical. In fact, it works identical. There's only one difference. I'm not reading the whole file. I'm just trying to read. So that's the first difference. Other than that, the files should be identical. CSV utilities is identical. Please note, I had issues in the past lessons, and in this particular file, I have fixed that. If your code is not exactly the same as this, then bring this change to your code. However, if you use the code that I have supplied or the code that was in my repository, then you will already have this code. But what was different is this line here and this line here. That was the change I made to this method, and I also made a small change to this method. And if we look at the POJO was identical. In the slide I showed you the make header method, and when we wrote the code we also created the make body method. So that was the same, except remember here we said that we put this inside quotes, and here we passed the values. So here we were passing the labels, and here we were passing the values. So that's those three classes. Now we want to capture. So early in the lesson we learned how to read input from the keyboard. So I have created a method. It's called capture inside my address book capture class. So in the capture class, I have one method and it's called capture. Notice in my libraries, I always make my methods static, and I've done the same in the capture class. I've made this static. So I don't need to instantiate this class. I can just call the capture method directly. So I would say address book capture.capture and then in empty brackets. And what this is going to do, you see this method throws the IO exception like we would have done with the main method before. In the meal inquirer class, we did that in the main method, but now I'm doing it in the capture method. And also I imported the Java IO. So the code looks exactly the same. one difference, this capture method is returning a POJO. In this case, the POJO is the address book POJO. So what I've done here is I've created a variable called POJO. It's of type address book POJO, and I've instantiated it here. These two lines are the magic lines. It came straight out of the Meal Inquirer class. No changes were made. And then here I passed the field names as variables. So here in these two magic lines, I had the variable called reader. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying, what is the name, and in brackets, and surname? And then I do a name equals reader read line. Next, I'm doing a print, what is the email address, and I'm storing the email address. So you notice that when I run all these 5 read lines, I will have captured all the fields for this particular POJO: the name, the email, the phone, the mobile, notes, and a birthday. So at this point in time, and notes. At this point in time here, I have captured all the fields, these fields with values from the user. Having done that, I now will use the POJO setter methods. So set name, set email, set phone, and by doing that, I will then store all these values in the POJO. So when I return a POJO here, I've returned a populated POJO with the values the user typed. That's all there is to this address book capture class. Now the helper class, if you remember the design pattern, I'll display that afterwards. We have a helper class. The helper class is doing all the weightlifting. So if we go and look at the address book class, let's start from the front. The address book class calls the helper class, but because the methods are static, I don't instantiate this. I just say address book helper dot capture address book. So if we go into the helper, you see this method here is static and it's capture address book. So that's all we're doing in there, one line of code. Can you believe it? One line of code and my whole project is going to run. So that's how we're going to run it. And this is inside the main method. So when we launch the address book class, when we launch it, it's going to run the main method, and the main method is going to call the capture method of the helper class. So let's go to the helper class and see what it does. I declare a variable called POJO, address book POJO. Notice that I did not instantiate the variable. I just stored a equals null. There's a reason I'm doing that, because I'm going to be calling the capture class here. And the capture class has one method, the capture method. And when we looked at the capture class, we saw that that method returned the POJO, and it's also static. So this is making my life easy, because now I'm just saying POJO equals address book capture dot capture. That's it, nothing more. However, in this case, in my capture class, I should not get any exceptions, but I have made it throws IO exception. And the reason I've done that is today I'm working with strings only. You see, these are strings. So if the user hits a enter and doesn't type anything, it'll come back as an empty string. It's still valid, so the POJO will still store that value in the variable. However, in the next project, we are going to be using this capture class to be able to get not only strings, but to get integers and doubles. So the ints and the longs and the doubles, we want to be able to prompt the user to give us an amount. We are talking money, or a temperature, or the number of potatoes. And to do that, we are going to enter the number of potatoes, and then when we do the reader read line, we're going to get back a value, and we're going to need to test it to see if that value is a number or if it contains non-numeric characters like letters, in which case we will throw an exception. So that's the reason why my helper class will not trust the capture class. You see, if you don't trust someone's class, you wrap it inside a catch block. I don't trust this class, it could throw an exception. So I'm preventing my code from crashing if something stupid happens in this class. And how I do that is by putting it in a try catch block, and if there was an error, I would catch it here. Having done that, we now will have a value stored in the POJO. In our happy case, the user typed in valid values, and it saved all the values in the POJO. And now the POJO will be populated. You see here the POJO was set as null. So if we try to capture the POJO and something happened, in the catch block I set the POJO equals null. So whether the POJO was set or not set, I make it null so that I prevent the values. In other words, an error happened, I don't trust the POJO anymore, I make it null. And only if the POJO is not null do I save it. But I even validate it. I even check to see if the name is not null. So the first thing, if you type the name and you got the name right and the POJO was a null, only then will I save to the address book. So this part of the code is called validation. Otherwise, in the catch block I set failed true, and then here I display the error message. So whatever error we got, here we got failed to capture address book, and that's what we are going to display, and the program ends. So the way this capture address book works, every time you run the program, you capture one line in the spreadsheet. And later when you run it again, it captures another line, and so on and so on. Now let's look at the save method. So after validating that the POJO wasn't empty and not null, and that the name was set, I now will pass the POJO to this method. And you will see I have the save method for every application that we're going to build. Even for the lunar lander, I have a save method. But don't worry about that for now. So here we passed it the POJO. And if the POJO was null, you see, here I try to prevent it from going through. But I still don't trust that code there. So I'm passing a POJO, and if by some miracle the POJO was null, look what I'm doing. I'm saying POJO is null. Now, at this point in time, when we have a variable that is not a void, it returns something. But watch this. This variable is void, and I'm returning. But look, I'm not returning a variable. I'm just doing return. And what this will do is when the code executes there, it will end. So it will prevent the code from running because the POJO was empty, was equal to null. So that was a safety belt or safety feature. And then here we passed it the file name. Now you'll see that the CSV file name was declared as a static final string. And that is how we declare a constant. Also, look at the name. The words are all uppercase and separated with underscores. That is how we declare a constant. The naming convention for a constant in Java. This is how we declare constants. And we name them this way. And then here the value was address book v1.csv. So tomorrow, if we upgrade the code, you can make it v2. And there's nothing new here. We've already used this in the unit test. We already called the append, the CSV utilities, append method and the write method. So the code here, the only difference is in the unit test, we had to set the values manually for the header and the body. But here we use the Pojo's make header and the Pojo's make body. So that is this code. And now let us pause the video and copy the code up to line 32 if you want to cheat. Pause the video now. Then copy the code to the end. Pause the video now. So if you don't want to cheat and use the source code, then you have done it the way I would recommend you should do it. Because then you're typing it and you're getting errors and you're fixing errors. So now let's do the code for the address book. As I said, there's only one line of code in here. That's this line here. So create a class called address book. The file name is addressbook.java. Pause the video now. Now let's compile these classes. So the first file was the file utilities. Files. Compile. Right. The next one was the CSV utilities. The next one was the Pojo. Then we created the capture class. Then we created the helper class. And then lastly, we created the address book. Now everything compiled. I have been running this before, so there will be values in the CSV file. Hopefully, I haven't broken the logic of the code. So let's run this. James Randall. Email address jr@ra.com. Phone number 012-345-6789. And his mobile is 098-765-4321. His birthday is July the 5th. Not applicable, no notes. So now let's go and have a look at that file addressbook.csv ls-la. And it was just written now. Let us now have a look inside it. Cat. You may notice I'm running Linux commands inside my Windows. And this thing worked perfectly. The bug was fixed. So there's Lord James Randall, and he was added to the bottom of the spreadsheet. So let's go now and open this file. Here I was playing with Jack the Ripper. He wasn't born. There's Lord Randall, his email address. There's all his information. So this project has worked. Now you have a address book that you can use. Modify this to your own requirement. This is your first practical project. I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you. Please click the like button and also subscribe to this channel to help this channel grow. And also have a look in the comments and click on the show more link so that you can see what other videos we have in this series of training courses. Thank you for that.